Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here for another Product Growth Leaders conversation. We've been talking for the past few weeks about psychological safety and what is it? What's the impact of it? And this final one of a series is about how do you create it? And, you know, as we look through the role of product leadership, even product management as a whole, we're in a unique place for I almost say requirement to create psychological safety, whether it's as a product leader with our teams and in our organizations, or it's as a leader managing a cross-functional team of people who don't report to us. And almost psychological safety may be even more important in that latter scenario with cross-functional teams. Steve, I'd be interested to get your take on the importance of creating psychological safety as a product leader, as a product manager.
Well, I've certainly worked in my share of companies where nobody felt like they could say anything if the boss was around. And that's certainly not how you find out what's really going on with your team. I used to work with a delightful woman who would periodically invite spouses to dinner instead of employees to find out what was really going on, which I thought was awfully clever. And she, uncovered friction that she had not been aware of because, people were not feeling forthcoming in the organization. And ultimately, if you want to build a team, you need to have psychological safety.
Yes. So we on Monday put this question in, and this was the only question we put in this week. This was because of this topic. I didn't want to do a poll on what's the most important thing for I just didn't feel that was like the right place for it. But we asked the question, as product managers and leaders, how do you create psychological safety? And Jason Weber, who I always loves his take, came up with one word: listen. Right, listening is so important. The old saying, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, let's use it in that proportion. I don't know, is it as simple as that? Clay, you had commented on that. I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, it's easy to do, but I know for myself, I get caught up. I'm like, oh, well, I've always got something to say. So no, I think it's absolutely vital, but it's so easy to forget. So easy.
I love the Charles Munger quote you put in there. Just do something. Don't
Well,
just do something.
Like,
Stand there.
We don't get any serotonin and dopamine from listening. It doesn't feel like we're doing anything, and we're doing probably the most valuable thing you could. I was coaching a robotics team. I spent 2 hours with the team the first day formulating one suggestion. And I felt good at the end, but I would have liked to have made 100 suggestions.
Yes, very much so. May, does your team trust you enough to ask questions, give their opinion, or even challenge yours?
Yeah, so I think psychological safety is like how safe you feel to do that thing that you want to do, right? So it's really about trust, because it's like, in a way, faith that you won't be punished to do the thing. And in order to build that trust, it it's hard. And like, listening, yes, is the first step, but after you listen, if you don't do anything about what you heard, or what you've understood or incorporated into your worldview, like, that doesn't do anything, right? You can sit there and listen and take it all in, but if your actions don't change, like, well, what are you doing? So the question for me is, how do you build that trust, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that it's hard to build trust, and it's really, 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 really easy to break it. All you have to do is even say the wrong thing, and all of a sudden you've broken trust. Or
Even if that wasn't your intention.
even if it wasn't your intention, right? Like, if you accidentally use the wrong word, even if you go back and apologize, you have not repaired the trust, right? So
And
yeah.
And often you don't find out that you broke the trust until far later. So then you're in a situation where you're like, don't know if it's safe, won't know it's safe even after I do the thing. And if I'm lucky, I'll say the thing and then find out whether the thing was helpful or not. I mean, there's huge asymmetrical risk.
Yeah. So May, back to what you were saying.
Yeah. So it's like there is trust. So in order to build that trust, there's a couple ways to do it. One is to be vulnerable, right? So if you're vulnerable, people are more likely to be vulnerable with you. Know what your boundaries are to be vulnerable. Like, you don't have to tell them about childhood trauma to be vulnerable. You can just, like, tell them how you're feeling about this complex situation at work, and that might be enough. Or it's like, be a little open. Just, if you like, pay attention to what your personal filters are when you talk, and ask yourself, is this filter necessary? Right? Like, there are people who you meet and you talk to, and you can tell, like, you're hitting a filter wall every single time. And then there's people you meet and you're like, where are their filters? You can't find them. So, like, but those people you tend to be a lot more open to talking to, because it's like, well, if you're open with me, I'm open with you. It's pretty human nature, right? Um, and then on top of that, though, what do you do? A matter of trust is like, if you trust me, I'm more likely to trust you as well. So if I have to run every single thing by you, you don't trust me. If you tell me that I have the power to go make decisions within these, like, very broad guidelines, that's a lot of trust. And if I can trust that you will give me time to ask questions, to clarify, and whatever, like, if you build a structure, a system for me to be able to access information when I need it, but also me and my team have the autonomy to do the work that we need to do, and you're very supportive the entire way, like, that is in and of itself a way to build trust. And it's really about giving up that power control and sharing that with other people. And, like, that is a thing that you have to give up in order to build trust, in order to build psychological safety. It's like, if you have the power to do something, that power includes trust and safety. So I think it's important to, like, just understand what your personal amount of power you have, and then think about what you can let go so other people can share in that power. And that's how you build collective trust and safety, in my opinion.
May, you just have so many things going off in my head right now. And for those watching a video, I backed out of the showing the slide and the question because I've got a couple things. The first thing that came to my mind is, boy, how powerful Brene Brown has been at helping us think about vulnerability, right, for ourselves as leaders and what we can do. And, when we talk about soft skills for product management, product leaders, often we're talking more about stakeholder communications and that type of stuff. I don't know how much we are talking about vulnerability and that type of stuff to build these types of places, and maybe it's something we should. Second, over my shoulder right here, I actually put this book up for a reason. It's called Higher Purpose. It's about Zhang Ruimin, who is the CEO of Haier, the sort of the largest, one of the largest Chinese conglomerates, and he just won a Lifetime Achievement Award from Thinkers 50. But his whole status is to get rid of middle management, to push all decisions and trust down to the frontline workers and empower them to chase their ideas, go after things they're thinking about, be innovative. And I put it up there because this is like my ideal. I want to help create a place where we build trust, we build information flows, we build empowerment so we can push decision-making as far downstream as possible. And I think that's not possible without psychological safety and that trust you're talking about, with that letting you do your job. The other one is, I have to go to Ted Lasso, right? If you've watched the Ted Lasso series, in the end, happiness happens when they build a team that trusts each other, right? Where everybody on the team can back up the other person. They know what their job is and they're trusted to do it. And one of the people's like, you've been building the system the whole time. by building trust within the locker room with people liking each other. And to me, it's like there's so much about how do you create this place where people can be independent but interdependent at the same time, do their thing, but understand how they impact other people. As always, May, you have me thinking about all these things in my head now, and I'm going to be distracted as we keep going through this.
I think there's like an important little tiny piece to add. It's like if you are the leader and you're pushing responsibility, not pushing responsibility, like opening up responsibility and decision making downwards, you still have an accountability to the organization to make sure your teams are working towards the same direction, right? And that's why the conversations around OKRs and like alignment and strategy up and down, like that's why those conversations are so important in the world of product management, because like we do want our very expensive teams to have the authority to make decisions. So how do we make sure we are all moving in the same direction so we can get to our goals collectively?
Amen. Completely and totally agree. I love it. Dominic, you echoed Danny when she said talk the talk and walk the walk, but you gave a nice list of words. Some of them we've talked about already, but talk to me about where your head is.
Yeah. So yeah, just I want to avoid a long post here, but listening, and I just made some comments there in the chat too. I mean, listening is critical, but it's so difficult to do because we're all, biased, and I think it's important that we have to recognize that and try to remove all the concepts that we may have to actually truly listen, right, to individuals. So that's one piece. And then, being supportive, right? That's another area I think it's important, is showing support to individuals. I made a mistake way back then, early in my career, where I was listening to individuals and it was like family issues and go on and on and on and on. And I went down the rabbit hole, right? So being able to have a conversation, a supportive conversation, understanding, but not going down the rabbit hole of, personal issues, but bringing the individual back to the business, right? That's kind of an art as well. So it's very difficult to find and execute that support. And I like authenticity, right? It's important to be ourselves and not try to portray anything else. I mean, I think what else did I mention in the post?
Trust, communication, inclusivity.
Yeah, so inclusivity, yeah, that's another area where it's all about, we all hear D&I, and I think having an understanding that individuals have access to you and have access to other leaders and have access to other teams, right? This whole accessibility is important because that builds on trust as well, right? And it's all about collaboration as well, I think. I mean, these are kind of the two concepts I have in my mind right now.
Yeah, I've mentioned it, I think, in the past, but you think about Tom Peters and his idea of management by walking around, right? And I think this idea of, that's where support and empathy and authenticity comes. When I was at my last stint at GE, when I was a VP, we had a sales floor in Boulder. And at the end of the quarter, those people were working their butts off, right? And what I did the last week of each quarter was I just went down there and I camped, right? I didn't sit in my nice corner office. I went to the sales floor and I bought them lunch and I talked with them and I supported them. And if they needed a discount, I mean, they're salespeople, right? If they needed a discount on a deal, I was there to take care of it personally. But it was interesting because it was New Year's Eve was always one of the biggest. It's end of the calendar year, end of fiscal year for many people, and many people trying to sell stuff through the channel. And I lived in Denver. My two of my VPs directors lived in Boulder, and they both by themselves came to me and said, Grant, we'd like to be the cover for you so you don't have to be here or be on call on New Year's Eve. And it made me feel like we've built the right level of psychological safety, that they were volunteering and trying to do that type of stuff. And it's amazing how we can all bring that together. But I loved your list, Dominic, and I appreciate all the help you've done in the past few weeks with this topic with us. So thank you so much. Clay, you really changed my perspective here, because often we, and going into my consulting head, often we're like, how do you do this? How do you do this? But if you don't know the baseline, right? If you don't understand the current situation, how can you change it? So you said I'd start by finding out how safe they feel now. So I guess you can't, if you don't know that, how do you improve it or create it?
Yeah. Or how will we know if we succeeded? I mean, we could just assume they feel unsafe and take action to make them feel safer. But how will we know when we've succeeded?
Yeah. They start telling you everything?
Well, May talked about, May addressed that actually,
Yeah.
when they're giving you feedback and that sort of thing. The first thing is, can they tell you when they feel unsafe?
Yeah.
Right? Wow, you said this thing and I felt this way. I guess, I would say if they're willing to tell you how they feel, that seems like
There is
gold
some
standard.
safety there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least there's the opening there, right?
Yeah.
It's how you react to that.
What I'm saying is, if they're willing to tell you how they feel, that suggests to me they feel safe.
No, I agree. And I've mentioned it before. There's a great book by Megan Reitz, and I can't remember her co-author, called Speaking Truth to Power. It'll come back to me what the name of the book is.
And if I may, Clay, right? I mean, this is this tipping point where somebody feels safe and starts talking to you, right? But if it's a topic that has no relation to your business or to your challenges or whatsoever in the team environment, right? We have to be careful not to shut it down, because then it has major consequences for later, right? So this balance of listening and moving forward, right? It's tough. That is tough.
Completely and totally, very, very, very tough. You also had, in your second post, you answered twice this week: communicate, solicit input, and give feedback gently and sparingly. I thought those were a nice little how-to guide. So thank you, Clay. Karen Bell-DeWitt, good to have you on the call. I'd love to get your take. How do we do this? How do we create psychological safety as leaders, as product managers?
I think psychological safety is a very individual thing, and others here have already touched on it. Someone you may say too much to, someone you might not say enough to. So it's a very individual thing. So it's an imperfect thing. I think the organization needs to enact certain efforts from an HR perspective that say, here's what we're here's what we expect, here's what we'll tolerate, here's what we won't tolerate, and then they need to follow up on that. But I am not an HR expert, so I don't know what the limits are there. I do know that the company I work for right now is very good at it from an organizational standpoint. For me, I have to be myself. I have to be vulnerable. I have to stand up for the safety of others. I have to listen. I have to be interested in what other people are saying. And you guys can't see this, but I've got signs next to my camera that say listen, 2 signs. And then I've got one other one to the left of it that just says stop talking. Just because I need the reminder all the time. So I think that listening piece is key, but the one piece that I think is really important is if you start to see someone else shutting down, if you're in a conversation, either just a dyad, 2 of you, or in a broader group, and you see someone starting to shut down, or you see someone starting to take over or bully, someone else, you've got to stand up. You've got to say something or stand back, you know, in the case where someone else is shutting down, and pause. Because that psychological safety of other people is not going to just present itself as someone saying, hey, I don't feel psychologically safe anymore. You know, like others touched on here, people don't usually feel comfortable saying, I don't feel psychologically safe. As a matter of fact, I know of someone who didn't feel psychologically safe. They took it to HR. They used the word bully. I feel like I'm being bullied. And immediately HR went, whoa, them's fighting words. That sounds like a lawsuit to me. HR turned around on that other person and said, you might be the problem. So, you know, it's like, you can build up that psychological safety, you can tear it down. So in my comment in the forum, I added a little blurb, even if it puts you in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's that personal element of who are you and what do you stand for? What do you want to, you know, putting your money where your mouth is. If you're going to create a psychologically and safe environment, you have to take risks. And sometimes those aren't popular risks.
Well, and to your point, if you're not willing to risk yourself, what type of psychological safety are you creating?
Right.
Whether it's as an ally or as an advocate or whatever it may be, if we're not willing to put our neck on the line, right, all that talk is just talk.
Yeah.
Right. You know, back to Danny and Dom's talk the talk, walk the walk.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, HR, I know some people who believe that HR is just there to protect management. And it's tough because that should be a safe place for us to go to have those conversations. Richard, I'm going to go to you right there.
Grant, sorry if I may, and Karen, I apologize, but I wouldn't want to have HR involved because then it becomes something on the books, whatever. It's up to us as leaders to own it, right? Yeah. If you get HR involved, it's just becomes,
it's too late. If HR has to be there, it's too late.
I think it depends on HR's mentality. My sister's an HR director, and she's a very soft touch. And she's working in a company, it's a construction company, they're very chauvinistic. The stuff they do is like makes her cringe, but she's very delicate with them. And she's like, hey, you know, and by the way, the comment about if you see someone being whatever, not bullied, but whatever, you know, step in, that's tough to do because you want to do it really deftly so nobody feels like you're like, hey, you're, you know, not that you would do that. So it depends on HR. You know, maybe sometimes they really do want to help. Sometimes HR really is what the government wants to help.
Yeah, and again, the company that I work for right now is quite good. I'm really impressed. But as leaders, we have to develop those skills around stepping in a way that brings the energy level down and that makes everybody feel safe. That's on us.
Well, and what I would say is if you're in the right HR or people ops or whatever we're going to call it place, it's a proactive thing, not a reactive thing. I know a very well-known SaaS company, billion-dollar company now owned by private equity. I had the chance to interview their founder CEO. And one of the things he did was he had training on one-on-ones, training for managers and training for employees, right? They flipped it on the head and said, we want to make sure we're doing it right. We want to make sure we're building the right culture. And we're going to invest our dollars to make sure we're doing it right but that's being proactive. That's getting ahead of it, not reactive, waiting for the thing to happen. Richard, was going to come to you and then we had a little circle go there. So,
but it's funny, right? As product people, building psychological safety is what we do, right? We are great at active listening. It's how we understand what the customer needs instead of what they ask for. Right, we try and bring in, you know, other opinions to get rid of our bias. And when we're working with our teams, we want to normalize mistakes because we want them to be able to take risks. We want to set expectations and make sure they have the information and the tools they need to fulfill those expectations. And we do it all leading by example, right? So as product people, this is how we succeed. The frustrating part is when we're not in an environment that allows us to feel that same way. And that's probably why we're on week 3 talking about it, because there's so much under this topic that we can contribute to. So
I think that's and I'm like worried. Did you get my deck and see my next question?
no.
We'll dig in a little more on product managers and sort of the different role we have to play for it in a little different lens. Dutch.
I'm probably gonna. I didn't take a sneak peek either, but yeah. So it was said in the chat, you need to not listen to respond. You need to listen to understand. It's the difference between hearing somebody and listening empathetically. And like Richard just said, it's our job to listen empathetically. We're called the voice of the customer, but that means we're also the ears to the customer, but we're also the ears to the entire company. We're listening to what's going on everywhere. And in supporting and encouraging an organization or a team or a cross-functional group or whatever that has psychological safety, where they feel like they have the ability to speak up when something is going wrong. We're problem solvers. We like to identify problems and come up with a solution for them, but doing that in a team meeting isn't always the safest place. No matter what, there's always going to be some folks that may not see eye to eye, or they bump heads or whatever. And so what I've done is not only emulated what is supposed to be done of speaking out when something needs to be addressed, but I don't meet people just in a team meeting. I do one-to-ones. It may not be a counseling session, but it is hey, we've got this weekly meeting on Thursdays. Why don't we kind of talk about things on Tuesday or Wednesday or Monday or whatever leading up to that, so that we're on the same page going into that meeting. And then we can end up having a very effective, short, brief, targeted meeting where everyone discuss things on topic. But I do that with everybody that's going to be in the meeting, one-to-one, so that way they know that they have someone that has heard them, actually understood what they were saying, what their concerns are, or what their compliments are, for that matter. And then it can be then communicated to the entire group.
No, I think that's so critical, especially as a leader, that we can't just build it on a one versus many basis. We have to build it one-on-one and build those relationships as well. And we've used listening. I'm going to make a joke about myself now. My wife's always like, how are you so good at, why do these people love you? Why do they trust you so much? You never listen to me. I ask you to do stuff and you forget it. But I think, it is a superpower of product management, or should be a superpower, is that listening, is that empathy, is that understanding. Steve, gosh, so many great things already. I'd love to get, whether it's a summary, whether it's something new, talk to me, where's your head?
I remember somebody saying we all need a user guide on how to communicate with me. The way I like
specifically.
to learn. Yeah. Well, but any of us, but yes, I hear you. I say, but what's the best way to communicate with each of us? Maybe you like stories and I like data. Maybe, I don't know. But it does strike me that in my product management lives, I don't know that anybody ever taught me how to do discovery. I just kind of learned it on my own, right? And the same way with management. I suddenly found myself in management, and I'm like, is there any training for me here? Is there a user guide? How am I supposed to do this job that I've been promoted to, but I've got no no existing skills except what I taught myself. So I think all of this comes around to being really thoughtful about, as leaders, communication is like our number one thing. And yet, I've never been trained in it. And you're right. My wife says, how come you didn't do all those things I told you to do? I'm like, because you didn't write them down, right? If it didn't written down, it never happened.
I'm sorry, where are the JIRA tickets for that, honey?
Exactly.
I mean,
just log a ticket.
Maybe, Steve, I'm starting to understand why we get along so well. So I'm going to get to Karen in a second. One thing that you identified, that Karen had identified before, that really sticks with me is, and we say this about companies, no two companies are the same, right? Every company is different. Each of us is different. We have different learned experiences. We have different parental experiences and familial and friend experiences in college or whatever, and work experiences. And each of us have gotten to this unique place we are in a different way. Mm-hmm. And so it's so different. You could have a room of 5 people, all with 5 different views on what is safe and what isn't. And it's so hard. Karen.
Yeah, Steve was talking about how we communicate with each other and we should have a user guide and that kind of thing. I know of a company that did a bunch of personality preferences, communication preferences, assessments, and then train the employees on what those mean and people's communication styles. And on everybody's corporate badge, it's got their name and then it's got whatever category they fall into on the bottom of it. So assuming everyone's wearing their badge, theoretically, you can see somebody and be like, oh, they like the logical style, or oh, they like story time. And that's an effort to help people with that sort of user guide for each other.
Yeah, I saw that, Karen, at a place a while back, that there were color schemes that you could instantly recognize. And yet, I don't know, 20 years ago, I found out that I'm an ENTJ and I have no idea what to do with that information. But learning, having a quick colorized thing to tell you, oh, this is a listening person versus a reading person, or whatever those styles are. I think that's brilliant.
Well, Myers-Briggs gives you 16, and I'm an ENTP, and that PJ is probably whenever we butt heads on something.
Oh yeah, well, J, I do remember J is judgmental, and that would certainly be me.
I don't think any of these things are true, and I think it's dangerous to put yourself in a category. So you've ever heard of that most people are visual learners and like we learn this way and that way? Well, it turns out that's not true either. So I think it's important to recognize that we as humans like to put labels on ourselves, but really the best way for all of us to learn is through a multifaceted approach, because we're humans. Doing things help us learn. Watching things helps us learn. Having feedback and guided approaches help us work. Building on previous knowledge helps us learn. So I think it's like, let's recognize, we might be more inclined to one thing, but that's because we have to pick one most of the time. Right?
Yeah.
Some people just aren't great at lecture style learning, but that's because it's only the one way that we get information.
Wait, is anybody good at lecture style learning?
Some people are actually, yeah. But it's still not the best way that one person can learn, right? Yeah. It's if you have multiple exposures to it and you get to explore it and apply it and expand on it, that's actually the best way to learn about
the multi-layered approach. I love that.
Yeah.
Can I do a little rant on that?
Yeah,
I'm going through a grand jury right now, and yesterday one of the prosecutors said, we want you to review about 2 hours of testimony. Would you rather it be read to you, or would you rather we made copies and gave it to you to read? And there was 23 people said, let me read it. I mean, we had an experience where they were reading the transcript aloud like it was a little play, with two, the prosecutor and the prosecutor pretending to be the witness. And it was interesting, but I didn't grok any of it. It was like words. So
did they give you the option to have Morgan Freeman read it to you with ChatGPT?
Oh, that would be fun. All right.
That's an
Anyway,
option.
I didn't know, May, if you had a final point you wanted to make there, but I just was reacting to just this recent experience of a whole room full of people saying, don't just talk to me, let me read.
Yeah, it depends on the context, the type of stuff. Like if it's a lot of text, it's easier to read sometimes. But again, depends how you learn, right?
Each person's going to be a little different, and that's why
Yeah.
that multi-layered approach is important.
Sadly, it may be easier for them to just not read.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
I'll
think
read
like
that.
I think this also bleeds into like how we experience psychological safety, right? One facet isn't enough. If someone sits there and listens to you and like kind of applies what they've heard, it's like that might not be enough for some people. Culturally, it might not be okay for them to talk about the issues, right? Like, one of the challenges we had when we outsourced to India was that we had the local devs local devs in North America who were very happy giving feedback, and then the Indian the teams were very reluctant to give feedback because culturally it is not something that you do. So it was really hard to break that barrier because like under the attempt to move to agile, like we require it for it to happen, but you still need to have the right teams, the right managers, and it's harder when there are consultants because there's high turnaround. How do you like make sure that that continues on? So I think it's really a multifaceted challenge to build that psychological safety, and I think we should recognize that there are issues beyond what we can control within our purview, right, as product leaders and product managers.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually use that as to get to that next question, and it was specifically how different is it to build psychological safety in a cross-functional team, right? We've talked about it many times on these calls. Product management has this unique place where we're truly cross-functional, and we are tasked with leading cross-functional teams who don't report to us. And a lot of, we've talked about some of this power dynamic and this, sort of boss manager level psychological safety, but how different is it to build it in a cross-functional team or similar?
Sometimes it's your own psychological safety in a cross-functional team.
Very much that.
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. The all around best product management answer.
Yes.
And the reason for that is you can't control who the managers are on the other teams, right? For most of us, if we think back to literally any organization we've worked in, we have a pretty good sense of who the people are that we have issues with. And that's fine. Like humans don't have to get along with everyone else. The problem is if they are in a position of power and it influences how their teams have to act and how their teams have to interact with you. And again, going back to the idea of psychological safety has multiple layers. You have like your team safety, your organization safety, maybe like this block of cross-functional team safety, one-to-one safety, company safety, societal safety, right? You can build a bubble where it's safe to do things within these confines. And I think if you define what those confines are, it's easier to build out. So you don't have to control things that are like far, far, far beyond the reaches of what your power allows you to do. But again, this is about power. This is about like consensus. And if you can get all of these individual contributors to agree that this is what we want to build, great. And they do it together and it can be quite organic. But there comes a point where like that power cannot expand beyond this range. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that that's the case.
We only have so much control because there's things outside of our control. I get that. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I think this is what I was hearing from May. Each of those other teams has their own culture. And then you're bringing these people all together and saying, we're going to be safe here. Well, they're bringing lack of safety for different reasons. and they may not even recognize that the context has changed, right?
There's a kind of riffing on that point, doing some kind of exercise in the beginning of that to help build empathy across teams, so that each person on those teams can start to understand what the other teams are dealing with, what kinds of pressures they're facing, what kinds of inputs and outputs they need to do a good job and feel good about the work that they're doing. I think that's a really important exercise, especially if you're bringing a bunch of people together for an initial kickoff kind of thing. But
Yeah,
helping to preempt any of those fears is good.
I was working with a company where there was, I don't know if I'd call it vitriol, but there definitely was a us versus them mentality between product management and product development. And that when it came out to requirements, it just was a shit show. And we actually did a collaborative workshop with both sides to do it together, to identify what was good and what they didn't like, and what's good, what's bad look like. And it changed the culture, at least in that mini dynamic. But sometimes getting them to understand, we're in this together. I'll have to go to High School Musical. We're all in this together, right? So let's figure out how we can do that. Clay.
Yeah, I think Karen was saying, talking about what you need. I think that one thing that's hard to do, and I think people don't do it, and I know I've missed it, is to start with, this is what I need. I think people would rather, it feels safer to say, give me this, rather than to say, I have this need, and let them maybe volunteer solving the problem.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, running with that just for a second, you're right. As a culture, at least here in the US, we're so used to saying things like, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And yet in product management, we've learned that the sales team and the customer are almost always wrong on what the solution is. They think they know it, but when you get into the problem, you find out that the problem is something else entirely. So I think there's a cultural element there of, bring me solutions, but I think you're right. So many, how many times in our personal and professional lives have we said, well, okay, but what problem are we trying to solve here?
Yeah, completely agree. All right. What a great conversation. Let's head into key takeaways. What is your biggest learning or takeaway from this conversation? I'm going to start with you, Richard.
Biggest takeaway is we're all pretty aligned on what our expectations are along psychological safety in this group. And it's rare that you get 8 people together who are all saying the same thing.
Okay, it's good alignment. Maybe we're in the community together because we got some similar thoughts already. Dutch, you're on mute.
For me, and sounds like some other people, we may take it for granted. At least for me, especially, I always create my own psychological safety, and if I don't feel safe, I speak up about it. Mm-hmm. And because that's just ingrained in me, the problem then is that I forget that other people don't act that way. They don't speak up, and so it's a matter of not just practicing what we preach, but encouraging others to be doing the same thing. So emulating is one thing, but like trying to drag people into speaking up is a completely different ball game. And sometimes that's hard, and we don't always like doing hard.
And I have to, and this is me going off script for a second. Dutch, the example you've shown for how you've dealt with neurodivergency, ADHD, right? It's been an inspiration to me, and it's given me the psychological safety in this community, in the broader product community, to acknowledge myself having those issues. And so I want to thank you for giving me that, because sometimes it's even within a specific area, right? Acknowledging ourselves or our shortcomings or whatever it can
Yeah.
be. And so you've done an amazing job with me. I appreciate that. Thank
Well,
you.
and yeah, well, no, I appreciate that my example was beneficial to one person. That's all many of us can even ask for. But that's the part about emulating it is if I let people know, if, hey, this is my user's guide, I have ADHD, I get distracted easy, you know, you need to do certain things to accommodate me, and I'll do the best to accommodate you with certain things. If you speak up about those things so people know how to communicate with you, and then they don't, and they choose knowingly to do something else, then you know that that's not a safe place for you. And for me, if I don't no longer align and the people aren't willing to meet me halfway, there's 8 billion people on this world. I don't need to worry about one that doesn't align with me. There's plenty of others that will.
Yeah. No, I like that. Dominic.
Well, like Dutch was saying, we're a billion people, right? More than people. We're so many, right? And we're all different, and it is difficult. It is difficult, and we need to adapt, and we need to listen, and we need to, I guess, be creative towards the situation we're in.
Yeah, love it. Karen.
My takeaway is twofold. One, this group is all in agreement. So many other people that I know and talk with, which obviously is self-selected because they're my people, are also in agreement. Why is it so hard? And I think the answer is because it's hard, because we're human and we're imperfect. And all we can do is try. We can set up systems that help reinforce it, like what my company's HR group does. But it is just a damn hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And we need to make the effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Clay.
A couple of things. Lack of safety is invisible and corrosive. Admitting vulnerability is scary. If you don't feel safe, you can't test the waters to find out if it is safe. So the default is you assume it's not safe, and then you don't do anything. Leading with feelings that drive the request. I feel this way, therefore I'd like to do this. And we're well positioned, product leaders, to affect safety. That's it.
Yes. May.
I think a lot of what we talked about is about what we can do individually to build psychological safety. But the problem is systemic, right? Like you look at every single organization, these things happen over and over again. Why does that happen? And if you ever find yourself in a position of power, like what can you do with that power to change that system?
Yeah.
I think it's important to look at that system and say, how can we make decisions, intentionally design our organizations to promote better psychological safety?
Yes. Yeah. And that goes back to the proactive we talked about. Maybe HR needs to be shifting that way. Steve. Sorry, my friend Steve.
I think a lot of this has to do, as we started with trust, and trust is earned and easily lost. And yet I'm so often reminded of the ridiculous scene in the whatever hero movie, whatever thriller, where the hero says, "Do you trust me?" And I'm sitting there going, absolutely not. You have done nothing in this entire movie that leads me to believe that you can be trusted. And, the love interest always goes, "Oh, of course, James, I trust you." And then they jump down some bottomless pit that he happens to know has a net at the bottom. And it's like, so anyway, I think so often people say, "I need you to give me trust." And I think the reality is we have to earn that trust. and not assume that it exists.
I love that. And now I've got to, I was thinking about this earlier. It's like nobody suggested the way we build psychological safety is doing a trust fall. You think of the things people do.
Hang on,
trust
before you
you
go,
and
did I tell
catch
you
her.
this one last time? We did trust falls at some outdoor ropes course nonsense, and the CTO said, "Hey, let me tell you, I will catch you today, but in a meeting tomorrow, I will absolutely screw you if it's in my best interest." And at least, now I know what the relationship is.
By the way, that's trust building, to tell you that you couldn't trust him.
Yeah. And so I think my takeaway, there was an article from 7 years ago or so that was entitled, "I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people." And I think the reality is, at least in the American society, there's a lot of people who are only out for themselves and are selfish, and they want to do that. And there's only so much we can do to build psychological safety if there are people out there who don't know that they should care about other people. And so part of it's a societal thing, and we need to deal with it as we can. But that being said, Steve, CTO, and those people may be there, but we got to make sure that we pick up the bricks everywhere else we have them, and make sure we're building that psychological safety. And it's trust, and it's listening, it's empathy, it's understanding, it's modeling, as Dutch talked about. It's a whole bunch of stuff, and it's hard. But I think it's really, really rewarding when we can do that and we can get to a place like this. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you guys got as much out of this as I did over the past few weeks, these conversations. I really appreciate Dominic and Danny, who's not here today, taking the lead on helping us guide this conversation. And look forward to more conversations related to this and not related to this. And with that said, our next topic is going to be in 3 weeks, because in the U.S. we've got the U.S. Thanksgiving, and so Steve and I are taking that week off, and we're not going to do it that week. That would have been the normal 2 weeks, so it'll be a week after Thanksgiving, and we're going to talk about setting annual objectives for product management. It's hard, right? Between OKRs and MBOs and everything else, and cascading and whatever. Topic we've never talked about, so I look forward to getting people's ideas. I thought that would be a good topic for a December conversation.
Grant,
Yes,
Come in.
Dominic.
objective,
Please.
personal or business?
We'll see when the question gets there. I still have to write the question, and maybe there's 2 different questions, right? But we do this on a regular basis. We've got over 120 of these conversations that we've done already on a myriad of topics. And so, I invite everybody to come check the community out, participate when we have them, but check out some of the legacy ones we have. There's podcasts of them, there's YouTube videos of them. My kids are slaving away trying to catch up on all the videos from all the sessions we've had. But I thank each and every one of you for being vulnerable on this call, to being here, to sharing. And I look forward to more great conversations with everybody. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week, or in 3 weeks, or whenever, in the community. I'll see May in Toronto next week. Take care, everybody.